When the Ontario Human Rights Commission launched the Right to Read public inquiry in 2019, the questions that they were asking created quite a buzz within education in Ontario and in our public schools. We know at IDA Ontario that there are educators, teachers, speech and language pathologists, and psychologists who have been passionately advocating for structured literacy and an evidence-based approach to classroom instruction and assessment really for decades. And many of these teachers and professionals have been quietly doing these practices in their classrooms for quite some time. But when the OHRC launched the report, including the terms of reference of the inquiry and the letters that they sent to the school boards and faculties of education, it sparked a lot of questions and a lot of discussion in Ontario, and it also helped these teachers and other professionals to really find their voice and come together. So over the last 2.5 years since the inquiry was launched, there has been a growing grassroots movement in Ontario of teachers and, as I said, speech language pathologists, EAs, administrators, and psychologists who have been coming together to share information with one another about the practices that they are using in their classrooms and about the learning around the science of reading that they're doing. And we at IDA Ontario have been so pleased to be a part of this movement and to create spaces for these educators to come together and to do this sort of sharing and learning. So many educators in Ontario have now taken courses on their own to fill in the gaps that were in their knowledge. And many have already successfully begun to shift their practices to a structured literacy approach and are experiencing amazing results in their classrooms. But we also know that there are many teachers who are feeling overwhelmed right now and who are not sure of where to begin with this learning journey because it is very new for a lot of people. So in an effort to support all of Ontario's educators, IDA Ontario ran a free workshop series last fall. We called this Becoming a Literacy Leader, Creating a Culture Shift Towards the Science of Reading. The purpose of this series was to bring together educators at all stages in the shift from balanced literacy to structured literacy, to celebrate their successes and to discuss the challenges that they're facing as they shift their instruction. Many educators in Ontario and administrators and school boards have already come up with strategies to overcome these challenges. So another purpose of this workshop was to share those experiences to benefit those who are newer to the journey. We had over 900 educators from 55 different Ontario school boards and First Nations educational authorities take part in that workshop series last fall. And through that, we gathered information about the challenges that our educators and administrators are facing as they're working to shift their practices. We also managed to identify a number of, quite a few, I should say, teachers and schools, entire schools, and even some school boards who are much further along in their journey and have managed to successfully, as I said, overcome some of those challenges. So I think the information and the experiences of those boards, those early adopters, are really helpful. Earlier this month, IDA Ontario hosted a webinar for the Ontario Catholic Supervisory Officers Association to help share the information that we gathered during that workshop process by highlighting success stories in 5 of our Catholic school boards. And I'd like to thank all of the educators and other professionals who participated in that workshop series, and also the ones, of course, who shared their stories at that webinar. I have included the link to that webinar in the Padlet. If you'd like to watch that, you can see more success stories and more things that are happening in Ontario school boards as we make the shift. One of the questions that came up very often during the workshop series and happens in many of our other professional learning opportunities at IDA Ontario is that teachers are really curious to know what the structured literacy approach actually looks like in their classroom and what are some things they can do to get started right away. What are some things that they can do to get going? So to help us understand how to integrate structured literacy into the day, we have 2 Ontario educators from the Limestone District School Board in Kingston who have recorded a short video for us because both of them are unfortunately in the classroom today. They couldn't join us to share 10 tips for integrating structured literacy into their classroom. So bear with me and I will start that. And then following that, we will have our presentation by Dr. Gab.
Hello, my name is Kim Lockhart, and I am a French immersion classroom teacher.
And I'm Emily Moorhead, and I'm a kindergarten teacher. We're going to tell you today about some of the ways we use structured literacy in our classrooms every day.
We're going to talk about 10 ways that we incorporate structured literacy elements in our classroom practice.
One of the first things we always try to work on is really working on building students' oral language. We can do this in many ways, but some things that are important to remember are that we need to recognize and know who our low language learners are so that we can provide extra modeling and support for those children. We can do an activity called See, Think, Wonder, where we demonstrate with a picture of something really interesting and then have children use sentence stems to talk about that picture. So they can say, I see, and finish the sentence, I think, and finish the sentence, I wonder. These activities give children lots of opportunities to build that oral language and use descriptive words to help them tell about what they see, think, and wonder. They're also an excellent bridge to written expression.
Articulation is another very important piece of the structured literacy puzzle. I explicitly teach and show and model my students how to pronounce sounds. We want to make sure that students are articulating or pronouncing their sounds correctly. And in the French language, we have some sounds that aren't as familiar because they don't exist in the English language. And the way I do that is I show with my mouth where my teeth and my lips are when I say certain sounds. And I also give students a mirror so that they can look at the shape and position of their mouth, teeth, and tongue when they say a word or a sound. Also, in a whole group lesson, I will often show students how we can turn our voices on or off when we say certain sounds. For example, the sound V. If you hold your throat, the students can feel the vibration that their vocal cords are making. Whereas when we say its brother sound, it does not cause any kind of vibration. So students sometimes who have articulation difficulties have fun with that. Also, I always consult with my speech and language pathologist or CDA if I need more tips to help in the classroom.
The next thing we can do is ensure that we're doing playful daily phonemic awareness activities that are tied right to our phonics instruction. When we tie these two together, they're very, very powerful. And we can make these activities short and fun and funny for students so that they want to come back for more and they're enjoying the time that they're spending with us. We can make sure that we're doing lots of activities that work on blending sounds together, as well as segmenting the sounds. So we're reading and spelling small words. And as we introduce more of the code, more of the letter patterns and sounds that we learn in English or in French, we can then teach children how to spell those sounds and read them quite easily so that they can blend them together to read lots of words. This is really important because these skills are reciprocal. So we want to make sure we're using a nice balance of encoding and decoding to help children really balance those skills.
So that leads us into our next component. Something that is unique to a structured literacy approach is the use of decodable texts. Sometimes you'll hear the word controlled text because a decodable text is when we can control the letters and sounds that students see in the text. I often like to build decodable text with my students. So we start with the most easy, simple sounds, and then we slowly start to build those sounds. And I gradually incorporate new code or new letters and sounds into the sounds that they have consolidated. So we always start with individual sounds, and then we build syllables with some of those sounds. And then with those syllables, we make multisyllabic words. And then we use those multisyllabic words to build sentences. And we use those sentences to practice every single day because at the end of the day, we want students to be able to recognize the words automatically. So this is a great resource to use decodable text or controlled text that you build with your students to practice fluency as well.
It's also a great bridge to getting into reading everything else that they might want to read. It's important when they have lots of time to practice those skills, those decoding skills, so that that becomes really effortless and they can move right into reading all of the materials they'd like to read. Another big area that we need to focus on for some of our children, and really for all of our children, is background knowledge. Children use their background knowledge to help them understand what they read. And it's important for some of our students who may not have had those experiences that we try to create situations at school where they have hands-on exposure to things that they maybe haven't tried or seen before, so that they actually build that background knowledge as well. We can do this through field trips or hands-on activities in our classrooms so that children have real life experience with the things that they're trying to read about. It's important to explicitly teach vocabulary children might need, and it's important to directly teach subject-specific knowledge and vocabulary so that our children can also understand math and science and social studies materials as well.
So vocabulary is often a neglected piece of the structured literacy puzzle. So we also need to explicitly teach vocabulary. In FSL classes, this is particularly important because our students are not coming in with any background knowledge or any oral language vocabulary in their head. So we have to explicitly teach what the words mean. So when they go to decode the word, they can attach meaning to those sounds or those words. And one way that I do this is I engage the students in various forms of text. So we will be looking at something that is subject specific. So in social studies, we'll talk specifically about the vocabulary that's important to the unit of study, or in science, it lends itself wonderfully to vocabulary. And we want to build students French and English vocabulary so that when they are reading independently, they can attach meaning to those words that they are decoding.
Sometimes it's fun as well when you have a book that you're about to read to your students, if you've already read through that text, and you can have some sticky notes on the front that highlight for the teacher or the educator some words that might be tricky or new for students, and you can actually pre-teach those ones ahead of reading the book so that when they come up in the story, children are able to understand that text more easily and keep right on listening. Fluency is the bridge between word recognition and comprehension, and it can be one that's really tricky to master at school. When we have time throughout our days to have children read text repeatedly and to work carefully on making sure that they're understanding that text should, when we read it, we actually want to aim to sound like regular speech. So we show children that through lots of modeling, and when we read aloud to our students, we have a great opportunity to do that. We can also teach children that actually it's not necessarily about being a fast reader so much as being an expressive reader and having nice, clear, accurate speech when we're reading. So we want to make sure children are getting a good picture of what reading sounds like when it sounds really nice. It's also very, very helpful when we can provide immediate feedback for children when they're working on their fluency, because we want them to know what they can do to make that fluency easier. So they can work at the word level and make sure that they can read those words quite quickly and swiftly. And we also can show them things like scooping the phrases to help them group little bunches of words together to make their words sound more like regular speech.
In my classroom, I explicitly teach students how to print their letters. Printing is a big part of the reading process, and I show students that letters have a correct way to form them. I also really make sure that we use lines because we want to make sure that students can write legibly on the lines and they're not all over the place. So when they go to read their own writing, it is legible and they can read it. Also, letter formation is important, so we can help differentiate between certain tricky letters. And sometimes students get the letters B and D confused. Sometimes they get the letters P and Q confused. So what we want to do is we want to show students that these letters are actually formed differently. The letter B starts at the top, whereas the letter D starts with the magic C. And by printing these letters differently, they will then be able to understand that these letters have different sounds. And when we use these different sounds, they can drastically affect the meaning of words. Also, we want to make sure that we show students that printing is from left to right, which is the same direction that we read. So by showing students that we print from left to right reinforces the importance of directionality when we're reading.
Spelling instruction is really essential for helping children learn to read and spell. When we're really explicit about our spelling instruction, we can ensure that children are able to use their phonemic awareness in a way that's effective for getting the sounds down on paper. This starts with tiny sounds that they know quite well, and we move as we teach more complex material and complex code. We can also teach them how our language works and how those sounds fit together to make words. And so we can be really explicit about the position of some patterns that will only show up at the end of a word or only show up at the beginning. That's helpful information for our learners when they're working on figuring out the spelling system of our language. One of the things that we do when we're practicing explicit instruction about spelling is to really work on using our phonemic awareness. So I'll show you quickly. We always start by having the students say the word that they're going to spell, and then we have them segment the sounds. So if they were writing down the word hug, they would say g, and they would hear those 3 sounds, and then they would attach the letters that go with those ones to make those sounds. So the H, the U, the G. Finally, they would take another look and read through their word again to be sure they got the right letters and sounds on their paper, and then they would know that they had done a good job with that spelling. Spelling is reciprocal to decoding, so it's really important, as we talked about before, to use both of those back and forth, and make sure that we're building that wiring in their brains going both directions.
And finally, our 10th tip for you today is evidence-based screeners and progress monitoring. We use evidence-based screeners to screen students before we begin our interventions. We want to make sure that we know exactly what areas we need to target with our instruction. So screeners are not diagnostic. We're not diagnosing. We're just looking for which specific areas a child is struggling with. So if a child is struggling with reading comprehension, there are many different elements that could be affecting their ability to comprehend. It might be phonemic awareness, it could be phonics, it could be vocabulary, it could be their fluency. So using a screener will help us target our interventions and our whole class instruction so that we can help that child progress. Progress monitoring is equally important because we want to always be checking to see if our instruction and if our interventions are working. And if not, then we need to go back and reflect on our practices and try something else. Because at the end of the day, we just want to help our students move forward with their reading as efficiently as possible.
Thank you very much for listening. We hope that we've offered you some ideas for how to use structured literacy in your classroom throughout the school day. And we hope that you'll be able to take some pieces of this. We know that even small changes that we might make a big difference for our learners. And as we see the effects of those small changes, it's really powerful to keep making more small changes to make the best of our time with our students.
Thank you.